Hello, hello.
Oh,
How are you doing?
I cannot complain. It's actually raining, and people think rain is bad. No, rain is good for us, and it's warm. It's melting the snow off.
There you
So,
go.
so rain is good for us once in a while.
Let's talk about that. Welcome to the conversation where we will highlight several different ministries and various topics of things, well, that we just want to talk about. Sit back, relax, and join in the conversation.
I'm Rodney Gasaway, and I am a deacon at both Newburgh United Methodist Church and at Chelsea First United Methodist Church. And I want to welcome you to this Zoom recording today, an interview. Today I have Jim Fatic, which is the executive director from North Shore Disaster Recovery, aka the Epworth Project. And I have Randy Hilbrebrant, which is the director of God's Country Cooperative Parish in the UP. And I have worked with both of these gentlemen multiple times on their sites. And Newburgh has been to both of these sites on a couple occasions. And so we just wanted to kind of do an interview and talk about missions and why missions are so important to us in our Christian walk, and find a little bit of examples about what it is they do in each of their settings and who it is they serve, and just some general information. So once again, I want to thank you for watching this video and taking some time. And afterwards, if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me at the churches and by email or by phone, and I would be able to happy to answer any questions or put you in contact with either one of these gentlemen. We're going to start today by just asking a few questions here with each. Gentlemen, first I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself. Randy, would you like to go first?
I sure would. My name is Randy Hilbrebrant. I'm with God's Country Cooperative Parish in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. As we say up here, I always say we are the roof of Michigan up here. And I have been a church and community worker now for almost over 24 years, working in the General Board of Global Ministry. And this is one of my appointments now that I'm at, and I am really enjoying it up here, and look forward to answering more questions as we go along.
Hi, y'all. My name is Jim Fatic. I'm the Executive Director of North Shore Disaster Recovery, also known as the Epworth Project. And I have a background in strategic management. The way that I got to where I am right now is kind of a long and twisted road, and not nearly as interesting as the project itself. But I also serve as the Louisiana Volunteers in Mission training liaison for this region, and then also I do a lot of talks on poverty and that kind of thing. And actually, my background has moved from general business to dealing with poverty, and that's really what we spend a lot of our time doing is addressing poverty issues. But it all started with a hurricane, and I'll get to that in a moment.
All right. Well, thank you both. You both of you have a lot of a long background and a lot of experience, and we look forward to learning a bit from you today. So my first question for you guys is, what drew you to this type of work, the type of work that you do?
Yeah, well, I spent 15 years with the Walt Disney Company and found that I was spending more time with mice and ducks than I was with my wife and kids. So to achieve a little life balance, I left Walt Disney World. I was based in Florida doing marketing, and I came to the swamps of Louisiana, from the hot and muggy swamps of Florida to the hot and muggy swamps of Louisiana, to work with my father-in-law doing construction. About a year after we arrived here, though, Hurricane Katrina came along, and suddenly the landscape of southeastern Louisiana was a lot different, and people weren't building $1-million mansions on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain anymore. They were just looking for high, dry ground where they could stake a new claim. And it was a completely different field from where that company was focused. So to make the long story short, that ended up being unexpectedly dissolved as the real estate market crashed in this area. And I found myself with nothing but a lot of background in marketing and not a whole bunch of understanding of construction. So I started a consulting business and worked with a variety of companies. Ended up doing a lot of general management. I owned and managed a restaurant for a while, owned and managed a health club for a while, did a variety of things, but through a variety of issues. I had a kitchen fire in the restaurant. We had a major lawsuit at the health club that we won, but it cost us $200,000 to defend ourselves. You know, and I found myself with a lot of money out of pocket. And before I knew it, I went from being a guy with stellar credentials to a guy that didn't know how I was going to make the grocery bill this month. And I had kind of, I guess I could say I was blessed with the opportunity to experience poverty firsthand. And where it kind of came to a head for me was the first day of school. My 13-year-old daughter came up to me and asked for lunch money. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. You know, that was a life-changing moment for me, where you start to understand not just the financial condition of poverty, but the psychological condition of poverty. And I started working to help people get out of that poverty mindset, because it's not just a financial condition and a psychological condition, it becomes a spiritual condition. And about the same time, I had my predecessor that came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody to take my place. I want to retire. Have you ever thought about running a nonprofit?" I said, you know, honestly, no, I haven't. But limited on options, I ended up taking this position, and it has just been a dynamic and fantastic spiritual adventure. And what we do here is life-changing, not just for our homeowners, but for our volunteers and our staff. It's a great way to touch a lot of lives and glorify the Lord. So it's been a great spiritual adventure.
Well, my adventure started I know this is going to sound strange. I was in college athletics for a while, and I worked in that for many years and coached a little football. I played a little bit. I was no All-American. I was nothing like that. I was just an old average player, and decided I wanted to go into the administration of athletics, and I did that for a while. And then I got out of that. My boss, the athletic director at Western Kentucky University, said, "Randy, there is a higher calling in your life besides doing this." And he said, "You're always helping people. You've always got something going on. You're helping somebody." He said, "You need to look into that." And so I started looking into that as a possibility. I ended up becoming a youth minister, and I wanted more than youth ministry. I wanted to be hands-on with people, helping people. That was my thing. And it later brought me into church and community ministry. And I have been in church and community ministry for almost, like I said, I've been in the ministry for 24 years, and I've been in the church and community ministry for almost 19 now. So I've been there. I have served in the Appalachians in Eastern Kentucky and down into Eastern Tennessee. I served there for almost 11 years. I worked in one of the poorest counties in the United States of America, and I dealt with a lot of poverty, just as he spoke of earlier. We did everything from health checks to a boys and girls club where we worked with young people. I stayed there for 11 to 12 years. And as you know, as United Methodists, we like to move. So I was ready for a new change in life, and they sent me all the way to Nebraska, in Plainview, Nebraska, where I did church revitalization for small churches and rural churches. I have a very big heart for rural churches. I love rural life. I grew up in the rural life area, and my heart has always been with them, and just making sure they make it every day, and having the ability to give ministry to people in their community. And I was there for about 4 years, and then I left there, and I came to now what is known as God's Country Cooperative Parish. And I love it here. People say, "Does the snow drive you crazy?" Once in a while I say, "Oh, yes, it does." Don't get me wrong. When everybody's downstate in March and they're running around in shorts and I'm still in my fur parka up here, I get a little jealous. But God has put me where I need to be. And we have been working with building on this center now. That is a very big project for us. Right now, it's underway with getting the plumbing put in and the showers and getting all that ready for them to start. And then we have also started working with COVID-19 up here. Our center will be used as a place if it comes down to inoculations for people or for testing. Our center is as one of those places that will take place at. So we're trying to get that going, but I fell in love up here with the people. My daughter is getting ready to marry a young man from up here, and my son is in school at Northern Michigan University, where he's in law enforcement. And so we have made a great transition up here, and God has. It seems like you always ask a question to yourself: God, am I where I'm supposed to be? And somehow He answers that in a small, meticulous way. And He kind of renewed me a couple of weeks ago when we were going through all this building stuff, and He said, "I got you where I want you. I haven't brought you this far, and I'm not going to leave you here. So just keep on, keep doing your work." So that's a little bit about me and how I got where I'm at. And I enjoy working with young people. I enjoy working with young adults and everything. So I'm a people person.
All right, I appreciate you both sharing. I feel like there's some comrade spirits here, in that I came out of the secular business world and then ended up going into ministry and working in Detroit as the director at Joyce Southfield Community Development Corp in inner city Detroit. And I grew up also in a rural area, so I can relate to God putting you where you are needed or where He needs you to be, because I would have never thought that that's where I would have ended up, growing in a town of about 800 people in southern Indiana on the Kentucky border. I was in a place, I never met anyone of color until I was 16 years of age. It was very different to be then, 10, 15 years later, to be then working in inner city Detroit, working and doing God's work there, and in many of the similar things in a extremely poverty-ridden area. And I'll tell you, your eyes are truly open to God's work in your life and to others, which kind of leads me into the next question. Why have you found that mission work is so impactful for those volunteering?
Give you a little bit of a background on the Epworth project, and then I'll tell you my all-time favorite story. Epworth project started up with Hurricane Katrina. We were the long-term recovery organization for what they called the North Shore Parish. So there was about 4 or 5 different parishes that were lumped together, and we oversaw the recovery efforts in those parishes. But what we found about 2 or 3 years after Katrina, because we didn't just have Hurricane Katrina, we followed it with Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Gustav, Hurricane Isaac, half a dozen numbered storms, a couple dozen unnamed storms, a few floods, and a handful of tornadoes. So for a while, we were the poster children for disaster in America. But we found that we continued to have volunteers that would show up, and they would go to the sheriff's department or the mayor and say, "Hey, I got 200 people from Nebraska. Where do you want us?" And we didn't really have any kind of mechanism for addressing the volunteers and the materials. We'd have a truckload of shingles that show up, and we really didn't know where to go with those. So we created the Epworth Project with the help of UMCOR, the Louisiana Conference of the United Methodist Church, and the local congregation of Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Slidell. And we built a dormitory facility, got some trucks and trailers and tools and all kinds of equipment, and we went to work. And then since that point, we've been bringing in volunteers from all around the country and all around the world. We've had somewhere around 64,000 volunteers from all 50 states and 43 countries around the world that have put in around 2.6 million labor hours to help repair and rebuild homes for people that were impacted by disaster. But as time has progressed, we found that for a lot of people, they didn't need a hurricane. Life itself was the disaster. We have a huge amount of poverty here. We actually have the highest rate, I think we're still the highest rate in the country of income inequality or economic disparity, depending on if you're a financier or an economist. But that means the difference between your haves and your have-nots is greatest in this area of anywhere in the country. Our poor are dirt poor. And when you have somebody that lives in a trailer that's 60 years old and the floor has rotted out and the windows are falling out of the side of the house. They have nowhere else to turn, and that's where our volunteers come in. Not only are our homeowner clients impacted by long-term poverty, but it's also a situation where we help the populations, the pockets of our population, different segments that have their own unique circumstances, predominantly elderly, disabled, people with long-term illnesses, and that sort of thing. So our average homeowner client is probably in their late 70s, usually female, Black, widowed, and in most cases has nowhere else to turn, no other family, no active church membership or anything else. So anyways, what we address is home issues and then the spiritual impact of poverty, because like I was saying a few moments ago, it's not just a financial condition. What we continue to find is that people are beyond desperate. They live in a world plagued with fear and anger and embarrassment and hopelessness. And when you show up with 20 people in a church van, suddenly that spark of hope is rekindled. And that brings me to my favorite all-time spiritual story. There was a couple that we were helping out with. It was actually a group from Michigan that started the work for us. It was Dave and Shirley, and they had been through the ringer. I mean, everything that could happen to a couple happened to these people. They had family members that committed suicide and murder, and they had drug addiction issues, both personally and throughout their family. They had 5 feet of water with Hurricane Katrina. They fixed up their house with what little income or cash reserves they had. And then Dave fell off of a ladder and broke his back. He was only able to follow through with 1 surgery because of the financial conditions, and ended up permanently disabled, walking with a cane. They flooded again with Hurricane Hurricane Isaac, and they lost everything they had, and they were living in a garden shed. And because their son was incarcerated for drug issues, they ended up raising their 7-year-old granddaughter in a garden shed. And we went to try to rebuild their home for them, and they were a very unique couple. You know, you were talking about people of color. Well, they were colorful people. Shirley was hearing impaired. She had no hearing from birth, and she never was able to go through any kind of formal education for her condition. So she just kind of came up with her own charade style of sign language. And you know, she was just the happiest person you could ever imagine, though. You know, she was very unique in that she'd been through so much that adversity was just kind of a way of life for her. But Dave was a little different. Dave was always a self-made man. He owned a diesel mechanic shop. He always worked with truck engines, and he was built like a rock. He was in his mid-60s when we started helping him, but he was his arms were twice the size of my thighs. He was the kind of guy that you could kind of imagine picking up a diesel engine and cramming it into a truck, you know, by hand. And he was all tattooed. He had a big bushy beard, and he smoked like a chimney, so he had a little brown circle around his mouth. But he was mad. He was angry at God. He was angry at life, that everything had gone wrong in his life, and he had nothing to show for it. And I had a group of youth that were working there, and I went to check on their progress at the end of the workday. They were pulling out of the driveway as I was pulling in. They live out the middle of the woods, kind of northwest of where we are. And I decided to go on in and just see where they were on work, though. And I pull up to the house, and Dave was on a little front stoop watching the youth leave. And he had a scowl on his face, but he always did. You know, he loved to intimidate the kids. You know, he also, he didn't really speak. He didn't need to talk to Shirley, so he had developed the habit of just kind of grunting. You know, you'd say, "How are you doing, Dave?" And he'd say, "Huh." "Okay," you know. So I walk up to the front porch, and And I think I asked that, "How you doing, Dave?" He said, "Well, I just wanted to come and check on the place, see how things are going." And I said, I, I said, I just wanted to thank you for letting us come and work on your house today. And he interrupted me and he said, "What?" That was the first word I think I ever understood out of Dave. He said, "Dave, I just want to thank you for letting us come and work on your house today." And he kind of got up in my face and he starts poking me in the chest and he said, "What do you mean by that?" I was kind of getting scared. He's getting kind of aggressive, and he's 3 times bigger than me. He's 6'8" and 260 pounds, and I'm feeling I'm in trouble here. And I said, Dave, I just wanted to thank you for opening your doors and letting us come in and work. I've got all these volunteers that want to come and help people that have the need, and if I didn't have people like you that open their doors and let us come and work on their homes, then we really don't have anything to do. And I said, I just wanted to thank you. And he said, "Man, I just don't get it." I said, "Dave, you don't have to get it. You just have to accept it." And the strangest thing happened. It's like a light switch clicked in Dave's head, and he suddenly realized kind of the whole gospel message of Jesus Christ in an instant. And he started crying, and for the next 45 minutes, he cried on my shoulder. And I don't know which was scarier, crying Dave or grunting Dave. But, he understood that somebody that he had never met before was eager to do something wonderful for him and never expected anything in return. And it suddenly dawned on him that this is the first time that he had ever experienced unconditional love. And that's what it's all about. Take somebody that is really down on luck, that life has treated poorly, and somebody who has given up all hope that anybody out there cares. And to have the opportunity to walk in there and do something wonderful and expect nothing in return, only because there's a God out there that loves them. And people like you and me have been called to help. That's what the Christian world is all about. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And it's a life-changing thing, not just for our homeowners, but for those youth and for the adult volunteers that we have throughout the year that come down and understand how desperate some people are, how difficult life is for people that have been through adversity. I had one lady that said that when her daughter killed herself, and then her husband left her, and she had to file for bankruptcy, that she just felt like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She just had this state of mind that things were going to go wrong. But then what she found was that the other shoe dropped, and then another shoe dropped, and another shoe dropped, and before she knew it, it was raining shoes. And I thought that was just a very insightful way of putting it. There are a lot of people out there all around us every day that have shoes raining all around. And the Epworth Project is one way that we can go and help out our neighbors in need.
But that was a beautiful story, and I'm thank you for sharing that. I think that really drives that question home. Randy, would you like to share on how you found the mission work is so impactful for its volunteers, or do you have some examples of the greatest impact for those you serve, or something of that nature?
One of the things that I always tell groups when they come to GCCP is that, you came on a mission trip, you're working here, you're doing this, you're doing that. But I always remind groups of this: missions does not stop here. Missions, when you go home, needs to be missions too. And I was a young man that is a product of somebody that took me on a mission trip and taught me about mission. And I would never thought 20 years later or 10 years later in my life, I would be doing what I'm doing now when I was that young. But this is where God has called me and God has put me here. And I always tell people this all the time. Missions, you don't have to go clear across the country to get to missions. Missions can start right next door with somebody that needs help and just showing unconditional love. I have many stories of things that have happened to me over the years here. I've been here now for almost 5 years. And some of the things I can remember the most is the day that the man came to me and I was working with a youth group down in a back alley. Guy drove up in this old beat up pickup, and I mean beat up. He come down that alley 55,000 miles an hour, as it seemed like. Dust, gravel everywhere, just flying all over the place. Slams his brakes on, and he comes up to one of the kids working there, and he goes, "Who's the person in charge of this place?" And of course, all 20 kids pointed right at me at the same time. So I got talking with him, and he came over, and he needed to know, yeah, he needed some help. He really needed some help. His wife was with cancer. They were having to lift her on a gurney over the porch to get her out. They had no ramp. And it was a story. But what really came out of it was that we put the ramp on the young lady's house, on the lady's home. We could get her in and out. But there's a story that came out of it. Her daughter, about 2 years later, or no, not 2 years later, let's say about a year later, came to us, and she needed help with the gas card because we do live in a medical desert and we do live in a food desert here. And she came and got a $25 gas card, and I kept looking at her and I kept going, I know her. Where do I know her from? You've been on those days before. You know, you're like, who is this person? I've seen this person. So she came in, and I always, the secretary fills all the paperwork out, then brings me the paperwork, and then I go through it. And I had her sit down in my office a minute, and she told me that she was a drug addict. And for a drug addict to say they have a problem to you confessing it wide open, that's big. That's a first step for a person that's dealing with addiction problems. And so I gave her a gas card so she could go have counseling. And a couple of years later, the mother passed away with cancer. And I had a chance to go to the funeral and pay my respects because I really liked them. It was one of the first homes I really worked on, really did a major job on. We put bathrooms and everything in there for her. And she said, well, Randy, I want to thank you, but I want to thank GCCP for that gas card because one of my mother's wish was that before she died that I would become clean. And to make this long story a little shorter, she just got her 4-year chip of sobriety today. This last month, she got her 4-year sobriety. So those are the stories that make you get up every morning and go to work. Those are the ones that drag your heart in it. My wife says you'll be wearing your heart on your sleeve before it's over with. But God's love is just phenomenal. It just oozes into places you can't think it oozes into. And I still keep up with that family today. I still keep up with that lady. I don't want to say her name, but I still keep up with her. And she's still sober. And she's taking care of her dad now, which his health is starting to fail now some. But those are the things that keep you going in missions. And again, I always tell people this. Missions, you don't have to drive 4 days to somewhere or 150 miles. Missions can start right where you're at, seeking the people that need God's love the most. And I really believe in that with all of my heart. And I've just seen God do things that just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable stuff. Things that I would never think would happen happens. I would never thought God's Country Cooperative Parish would have the parish building we have today. God made it happen. That's another story in itself. That would be a 4-day conversation there. So I don't want to do that one. But God loves his people. And if you are a person that can hear his voice, he will take you and use you in the mission field to make life's changes for people and help them understand. And that's really the story about God's Country Cooperative Parish is listening to what God is calling us to do. And us as people working here, as volunteers working here, we respond to that call every day. And once in a while, that's a difficult call to respond to, but somehow there's always a silver lining, even in those difficult responses that we have to make.
Thank you. Once again, both of you for those inspirational stories. I'm going to share a short one before we close out. It was because it kind of relates to this and how God uses us in different ways and how that impact can come differently than you might think. I had a group come in of youth from central Wisconsin into Detroit, and they were working with us. And part of what we did there, we would work on a lot of houses and so forth. But a lot of the things that we did at that time was there was a lot of vacancy in the houses, in these areas. And these houses would be left abandoned, and they could, young girls were dragged into these houses, and drug deals went on, and all the grass was overgrown in between. And so you'd have a lot of rodents and, as I'd call, other kind of snakes in the grass. So it made it unsafe for kids to ride their bikes up and down their own streets or do something that nature. And so what we do is we go through and cut all those vacant lots and board up these houses and so forth. Well, there was this 13-year-old girl from central Wisconsin, just did not like what she was doing. She was standing out there with a manual weed whip, chopping down weeds on these vacant lots. And it was warm, and she was just very unhappy. And for about 2 days, all she did was complain. Well, as would happen normally, some of the neighbors would come out after a few days and see you're not coming and going, you're there, and they'd start bringing out lunches or something to drink, or fire up the grill and fix some hot dogs or something like that. But a lot of times they would also come out and join you and start working. And so this older couple came up to this 13-year-old girl, which was kind of chopping her weeds. She was a house on each side of her and across the street, but she was kind of by herself because she was just in this, would be think foul mood. Well, this couple came out, started working with her, and basically during that conversation over several hours, they got to know each other a little bit. And they asked her, they said, "Why are you here?" And for this 13-year-old girl, she gave probably the most profound answer she could have possibly given. She says, "Because I believe this is where God wants me to be." Well, I saw this couple about 2 months later, and they came up to me and they talked to me and they said, "We had not attended church since 1979 because the church they were putting in new marble tile on the floor, and we were watching our pastor driving a Cadillac Eldorado, and yet we were doing nothing out in our community. And we had just kind of given up on church, lost hope in organized religion, as you would say." And they said, but they told me the story of what this little girl had said to them. They are now back in church, and they are now some of your, two of your most responsive people leading mission groups and leading volunteers and block clubs and cleanup in their community all across that area now. It's something that they picked up and they inspired from something a 13-year-old girl from central Wisconsin had said to them, working for 3 hours chopping weeds on a vacant lot. It's amazing how God works in our lives. So in that case, it wasn't a household or people that they were working on a particular property. It wasn't something that, I don't know that she's aware of the impact that she made. But somehow from getting to know them in that conversation, her entire attitude changed. And what she did changed the lives of two people that have changed the lives of so many others in their community. So it's sometimes the smallest things of showing that unconditional love and doing what it is that you feel God is calling you to do that can have the greatest impact. So I want to thank you both for being with us here today and sharing your stories. We will be visiting God's Cooperative Parish this year, seeing that as soon as everything is cleared up. And then we're looking at Epworth project for 2021, bringing a group back. It's been 3 years. It's about time we get back down there. and I think that would be 4 years at that time. So I think that's something that we're looking to come and see you both and spend some time with you. So I wanted a chance for the congregations that I serve to be able to learn a little bit more about you and what we're looking at and what it is that find out a little bit more about the areas in which you work and whom you serve. So thank you guys so much for being with us today and sharing of your time and your stories and your experiences, and I blessings for both of you. So thank you
for the opportunity, Rodney.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely.